Hi, this is Dr. Scott Young, and today we're going to get into the crypto conversation. We're going to talk all kinds of crypto issues. Zester and I were talking about this on Trina's channel, the Hero channel on Rumble, but we decided to kind of put it together. And he's actually has a kind of a cool new thing out there because there's so many people who do not get this thing. I mean, they're shoving in, crypto versus, CBDCs and QFS and thinking they're all the same thing, and you're going. So I want people to kind of see what happens here and see what Zester says about that too. So, hey, man, how's it going for you?
Oh, hey there, Dr. Scott. I'm doing well, and thank you so much for having me today. There's definitely a lot of confusion out there in terms of the terminology.
Well, let's bring up that first one here because we have it up on the stage here. This is a website that I was talking about. It's cointelegraph.com. It says that U.S. government moves 10,000 Bitcoin. Can you talk about that and tell me what's going on in there?
Oh, I would love to, and I'll go ahead and give you a warning, Dr. Scott. I can get a little bit fiery about it because I'm upset. I'm upset. And so for those that do keep up with crypto or just keep up with Republican politics, you probably would have heard about Donald Trump at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville, Tennessee. And I think it was somewhere in the early. It was about 1 week before the end of the month
Right.
of July. And while he was there, he announced that when he comes into office, he plans on enacting a strategic Bitcoin reserve for the country, and that he believes that we should never sell Bitcoin again. Ever since Donald Trump came on stage and made that announcement, the current administration has been funneling the Bitcoin that it currently holds into unknown wallet addresses. Typically, this is something that's scheduled ahead of time. A matter of fact, it's even federal law that it has to be scheduled ahead of time because it's considered market manipulation for the government to do things like this. And so, in the first tranche, the current administration moved about $2 billion worth of our money. Really, it's the American people's money that
Hmm.
they are moving to unknown wallets with zero announcement. And it has just been getting moved around over and over again, essentially getting washed to a degree between a bunch of wallets that we do not know who controls. Just yesterday, they moved another 10,000 Bitcoin worth about $600 million again to unknown wallets. And it is continuing to circulate at this very moment as we talk, Dr. Scott. And so this to me leads some very large questions in regards to what is going on. This is market manipulation, potentially theft. What do they plan on spending those dollars on? I imagine Zelensky is already, has his hand up. And so it's a huge question mark. Are they stealing it, or are they just trying to take it away from Donald Trump? Donald Trump said he wanted to hold all of this Bitcoin in a reserve for the future in order to keep the United States government competitive as we move towards a new financial system. And so huge.
Is it possible though that I mean, because I've been seeing crypto wallets going to zero and then coming back up, which could be a response of, wait a second, the QFS is starting to, fully, be online without any other issues. Or for instance, what was it? Warren Buffett just came up with, he just dropped about almost all of his stocks. He's at $250 billion in cash, which can only mean one of two things. Either we're about ready to have a massive crash in the market, or could it be Executive Order 13818, where, if crimes against humanity, we're going to take your money. So they're, this stuff is being taken off of the sickos' hands and put in a new set of hands, like military hands, in essence. Is that possible, or not really? Don't really know.
In my opinion, from what we've seen, especially kind of going back to actually the article we had looked at on the Hero Network when we got to chat there, in regards to the bill from Senator Cynthia Lummis, who's planning on revaluing the gold held by the Federal Reserve banks and actually removing it from the Federal Reserve banks back
Right.
to the U.S. Treasury. And she's setting that up in essentially preparation for a Donald Trump presidency. And so I do think there's a lot to be said about the stage being set in that regard. And that, you know, there are a lot of moving parts to all of this. We need, before we can possibly achieve a new financial system, we need to revalue the resources that are currently held by the US government, held by governments all around the world, in order to make that new system functional. And so I see this as a stage being set. I view it as a process that is going to occur throughout this next administration, assuming we manage to beat those that are trying to hold this thing back, which in my mind, we can achieve that. And we have a part to play in that when it comes down to this election in November.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, and this is what we were talking about the other day. The Bitcoin reserve to be funded partly by revaluing out the gold. And, you know, so let's do this though, before we, you know, fully get into that one, because I think there are some, number one, I'm going to let you guys see, this is how you can find Zester. Go to YouTube, you know, at Crazy Cryptonaut. You can find him right there. He's got like 30, about 3,600 or so, 3,700 subscribers. Hey, let's pop him up a little bit, because he'll give you some good background on this kind of thing too with that. But let's go more basic for a lot of people. And it says, you know, how do cryptos work? You know, first off, I mean, what the heck is it? And how do cryptos actually work? And then we'll talk about the rest of it.
Well, that's definitely that's definitely a rabbit hole.
Right.
But in terms of how cryptos work on a very, very basic level, what a cryptocurrency is actually a blockchain. And so it's easier to define blockchain, and then everything else kind of falls into place. And so what a blockchain is a decentralized ledger. It's a bunch of different computers that all essentially have the same information on them. And the way to imagine how this works is that everybody that's out there mining Bitcoin or running a node, whether it's Ethereum or XRP or any of these different cryptos, is verifying these transactions as they occur. And because all these different computers are all verifying these transactions independently, they then come to a consensus on whether they have the right answer, and that block is then minted. This is what allows for the immutability of the blockchain and to guarantee that all transactions are valid. It avoids the possibility of tricking it, in the same way that our current SWIFT system can very easily be tricked. It's just numbers on a banker's screen. When the Federal Reserve decides to add another zero, there's just another zero. Whereas when it comes to a blockchain, it actually has to go through and be properly verified. And that ensures that every transaction is legitimate. And all they're really doing is everybody is just keeping a book on their computer of what everyone else has in their wallets, not their names, just a wallet address. And that's where, when you hear these talks of transparency and accountability, that's where that comes into play. We know where the money goes. We know what they're using the money for, but it doesn't mean we know their names. It's not like we have their social security number or something.
So, I mean, I think what one way to look at this, and, you know, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm happy to, you know, be wrong on this. I mean, we have the fiat system. Okay. Fiat currency is just confidence in your own particular currency, whether it's, you know, the UK, geez, I just lost it. A pound, sorry, holy cow, you know, versus, you know, the American dollar or the Russian ruble kind of thing. Those are fiats built by a, you know, a central bank that is, you know, throughout the world. It's all set throughout the world. So it has internationality with it, or global in that way. And what happens is that everyone is utilizing it. So therefore, you know, all of transactions are happening through the dollar, ruble, whatever that might be. But what cryptocurrencies, when they were coming out in 2009, you know, ish timeframe, and you know that they were an alternate source of being able to do it, but they still have a basis in the dollar or in, the dong, or pick the currency that can have out there, that kind of you're pushing it through. Would that be kind of a one way to say it as well?
And in a way, it would be, because it did provide a means for us to slowly move away from the fiat system without having a shock.
Right.
We've now been slowly moving away from fiat towards digital currency now for going on 15 years. And so it allowed for that slow shift. But the really big advantage that it provides and where it is going to change the world is that you're not having to go through a bank or a centralized government to
Correct. Yeah.
verify whether you have access to your funds. It's decentralized.
Yeah.
And that takes away that central power that we have never been able to get away from in the form of all past currencies, whether it was gold or silver or the US dollar or anything else. Ultimately, you only had money if the bank and the government said you did.
Right.
And at any point in time, they could just go ahead and put the kibosh on that. With blockchain technology, now we are actually going to be self-custodians of our financial wealth. No one can stop us from doing something smart, good, or anything in between. But because of the blockchain, we will then also be held accountable for misdeeds.
Right. Well, and you can figure it out with that kind of thing too, with that. So, I mean, and one of the things, now this is a deeper question, but it's not as deep of a question in some ways. So we talk about, how cryptos work, but can they still be constitutional in nature? Or, how does that, I mean, how would you kind of say about that? Or what would you say about that one?
Well, I mean, and that one going back to the forefathers and everything in between, we had a very large conversation in our country's early days on how banking was going to work. I mean, that would have been the Madison debate over whether we needed
Right.
a central bank authority at that point in time. And so my argument would be that the current fiat dollar is unconstitutional,
Right.
in its bare form. And so by that definition, we've operated under unconstitutional currencies essentially since the beginning.
On and off.
At least we
Yeah.
don't have
Right.
a different currency like we had under the Articles of Confederation in every state, where we had, the North Carolina dollar, and North Carolina's government would just print as many as they felt like. And then, if you were in Virginia, you just had to figure out if the guy felt like taking it. And so for me, it's actually the opportunity to finally create a truly constitutional currency, because it would finally be controlled by the American people, not by the American government. And that is what is going to be so important when it comes down to the regulations and the way that this is enacted. And that, to me, comes into that debate between a central bank digital currency, as we've heard very often, and a truly decentralized currency. And I don't think that fight is over. I believe that in the background right now, the people in power are currently fighting back and forth over whether we're going to end up with a central bank digital currency, which would be extremely unconstitutional.
Right.
It would provide insane degrees of authoritarianism, authoritarian control to whoever was in power for those 8 years, or maybe they would just never decide to leave after.
Well, of course they wouldn't. Yeah.
And then the idea of a decentralized currency actually owned by the American people. That, to me, would be a pretty hard argument to say would be unconstitutional. Handing power back to the people is, I mean, that's the reason that we made one heck of a big cup of tea in Boston at one point in time.
Yeah. So when we talk a little about this area here, so we're going to go a little history, because we said this kind of thing, 2009, 2008, pick the date you like better, but can differentiate between what we have seen about the quantum financial system and the Bitcoin kind of thing, sitting on the two ledges here, that what they were trying to create.
That's a very, very interesting one, because I've been owned cryptocurrencies now for going on a decade. I didn't really get super into actually working in the industry until 2016. That's when I started working in ICO and fundraising and community management. And so much has changed since then. And that's where QFS is such an odd it's such an odd way that it
Right.
came into the lexicon. It didn't make any sense. It's just
Right.
one day I just started having QFS pop up out of nowhere. It was everything else had just been regular blockchain technology. We were talking about what the blockchain could do. What could we utilize it in terms of alternate industries? You know, we could create a voting system. We could create a means of ensuring proof of origin. We could do so many things, and that was the conversation we were having. And then all of a sudden, QFS. And I would absolutely point to the original boom of XRP and then the SEC court cases being filed. That to me was the point in time where QFS did not, it was no longer a fringe word. It was no longer this is some acronym that someone decided to use. It was something that people were talking about. And you had a lot of very influential people in those days in terms of Twitter, mainly Twitter and Reddit were really the two forms of spreading any type of information when it comes to crypto at that point. And QFS just went everywhere. And so I think that there's something to be said about it being tied not to the rise of XRP, but actually to the post fall of XRP and the SEC court cases. And so I'm very curious about what was the reasoning there. I've tried to do a lot of research to pinpoint when it really entered into not just being some crazy
some
you know,
weirdo's idea out
yeah.
there that we want to do. I'll put it this way, that I kind of Zester's coming from a different standard point, and I'm not a crypto guy with this at all. I've had to like learn so much. It's just not my thing to do it. I mean, for instance, like if you're asking me if I want to have a physical book or do I want to have like a web book kind of thing, or any kind of thing that you can put on a Kindle, I go, I want a physical book, kind of thing. So that's just a generational kind of thing with that as well. But one of the things that we know from a point in time is that that they have been trying to bring on the NESARA things, the NESARA funds. One of the time frames was at 9/11, and the two buildings, that the building 1 and 2 and the World Trade Center, were housing the some of it was one of it was gold and the other one was the computer system that was going to run the systems, and they had to create a false flag to go, no, we're not going to do it. And that was that cooperation between supposed cooperation between the cabal and what I like to call is the Anti Cabal, because that's how I heard about it. Once they said, wait a second, we can't trust them, the good guys, the Anti Cabal, we can't trust them. They decided to come bring the money in a different kind of way. And I won't say where, because I've never said it out loud to anyone necessarily, but it was from a southern region that the money came in, and it was around $83 trillion around 2008. And it's interesting because that's when we have the housing crisis, and that housing crisis happened, and there was a dispersal of funds that they say $250 billion was coming out to the Fed banks to kind of give them their money back so that they could fund out America, which they didn't do any of that stuff. What that money really was the $83 trillion to release America and then release out the world, and going into NESARA. But see, they stole that money because it came in through the SWIFT systems. And so what we've been hearing, and again, this is, some of this is through several sources, is that the QFS was kind of growing up at the same basic time frame as the Bitcoin kind of thing. Both of them blockchain kind of systems, so that you could actually know where that money went to, went to and went from. And so that was one of the things that happens out there. So I find it fascinating. Your story is pretty darn close to what I'm talking about, but it's just different. It's like we're standing on two different sides of a big old accident, and you're going, well, I see 4 cars over here and they're all blue, and I'm like, I only see red ones,
Yeah.
and yet it's the same accident in essence, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we're watching different sides of the same cube, and it is funny when you start to look at the timing when it comes to 2008, 2009, because that is when supposedly, and of course, no one knows the answer to this. That is when Satoshi Nakamoto started posting on a cryptography forum about an idea to create a decentralized internet currency. And this cryptography forum, they for those that are not aware, cryptography is code writing.
Right.
In the same way that the Enigma machine of World War II, or the very basic code that you might write a message in between friends when you were a little kid, where you wrote things backwards. Technically, cryptography, and so that's what these guys were all into. And this guy came out of nowhere with this idea to create a decentralized cryptography, something that had been hypothesized actually many, many years ago. We can go all the way back to the World War II era, where American cryptographers had the idea of using that decentralized cryptography to create a counter to the Enigma machine, something that
Right.
would be absolutely unbreakable, absolutely impossible to break.
By the way, that's a great story, the imitation game.
Mhm.
Although there's still more to that story, because when Alan Turing is the basic
Mhm.
father of the computer systems, right? And it's in essence, it's a punch card system. But by the way, at the same time in World War II, the Germans were using punch cards to track the Jews back and
Mhm.
forth from town to town. And this was done by IBM. So
Mhm.
while you have
Yeah.
both of these things happening that are the early computerized systems in essence, that not digitalized at the point, but it was like it's a different way of looking at it. Instead of having a little abacus that you're calculating things, you are utilizing a more complicated system to be able
Mhm.
to send information or basically computate in essence, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yes. And it was that beginning of the idea, and to me, that's where it becomes very odd for it to suddenly come back up in an obscure portion of the internet. I mean, I don't know many people who spend their Saturday afternoons on a cryptography forum.
Right.
Doesn't sound like a great time, but for these guys, it's a hobby, and I have weird hobbies too. I'm certain that other people don't find interesting, so I suppose I shouldn't give them a hard time. But for it to have gone from, well, this is a system that was discussed in the late 30s, early 40s, something that could be created or could be done. And then for suddenly in 2008, 2009, for some guy to just drop onto the internet, essentially a handbook on how to make it happen. It definitely, and of course, he provided essentially what's, call it a manifesto or whatever else about why he was creating it. And he said that it's obvious, seeing the way that the governments and the way that globally have been selling out their people, that ultimately the only way to hold our government accountable is to create an alternate financial system where we don't just care about the too big to fail. We don't
Right.
prioritize the elites and the rich. And the only way to do that is going to be to take it away from control of any one government, because then essentially all governments would be on an equal playing field in regards to this new form of currency. And he then asked for everyone there to help him solve the problems that he saw in terms of his work. He did not release Bitcoin. He then went back and forth, and there are years of forum comments back and forth between people on there discussing the different ways to solve different problems with blockchain. How are they going to get enough miners to validate the transactions? How are they going to scale up? How is scalability going to be created? They solved all of this in a matter of about a year and a half, 2 years. And that's either really, really an amazing incident where a bunch of very brilliant humans got together and created something unimaginable,
Or
or
it could be like a
it
white
was
hat
planned.
kind of thing, planning a system, because that's what it feels like. I mean,
Mhm.
because it doesn't feel like, I mean, it's a strange time frame. It also happens right around a financial collapse that was, if you research, and guys, you gotta research things. He used an example of too big to fail. I mean, that's a book. That's also, you can watch movies on this thing. There's a bunch of movies out there, and when you start to, and books too, when you start to look at why this happened, it doesn't make any sense. And by the way, it comes from the real estate industry that they were, manipulating, right? And then they were ensuring things that were fraudulent left and right. So even if you went out there and blew all of your money in Vegas, oh, you could just get it back and get it back in spades, in essence, and you're like, well, wait a second, how's that good? Now we're going to let someone go, spend it all on all the quarter slots over there. If he loses it, oh, it's okay, we'll just give him more money. Like, where do I sign up for that one?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. I'm in.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the too big to fail. I mean, that's the stupid of the too big to fail with that stuff too. So that's why I really recommend you guys, you really want to understand where we're going. You ought to look at some of the things that don't make sense. And what Zester's telling you is it kind of came out of nowhere and got together like this, when financial systems don't do that. And frankly, it's way more than a financial system. It's easily the voting system of the future. It's easily systems of licensure. I can absolutely see licensure coming from this. I can see this happening for and one of the areas that, when I first read about the NESARA stuff, is that it said that it was going to provide for financial privacy. And I'm going, how you do that? I mean, I had no idea. But once you understand what the QFS does, it has a point of privacy that I can't go in to Zester's account and find out what he's doing. I mean, unless I'm a particular agency that has the authority to accomplish that. Another conversation that would be, we don't want to go there too yet, but that gets into there. So when we talk about this, now we're going to move this forward because, we could spend time on that forever and a day. But we have this thing called XRP, XLM, we have all these other companies companies that are getting into this. So we have a internet, and I call it internet, thought is that XRP is backed by gold. And I go, and I'm going to tell you how I'm going to look at this, and then you can kind of go off on your way with that too. When gold and silver is supposed to be your modes of government currency, in essence. I mean, it's supposed to be the currency that we utilize, and that Congress, when you look at the first article in there, that Congress, through a treasury with that, is supposed to authorize people to do it, so that some despot we're using North Carolina doesn't get to start creating a currency and then corner the market, in essence. Right? That's the whole point of that. But you have to have a government for the people and by the people. And again, as Zester has talked about, that's kind of way. But having, so some people will say, well, yeah, but it's going to be gold backed. And I go, but that's a private organization that any one of us can buy. We can buy into just tomorrow. And that would mean I would have ownership as a private citizen, and other people wouldn't. I mean, if everyone had ownership, that's fine. But I would have ownership of a currency, which makes me ultimately powerful, because I would have a piece of ownership of a currency. And we're taking government or public a public asset like a gold to back a private organization that Scott owns, let's say. And that's where I kind of get into it. I go, hold on, that's a struggle with that too. So I know I gave a long one there, but see where I'm going with that.
Yeah, I know, and I have a lot of struggles with some of the different rumors, and these things have been going around now for 8 years.
Right.
A lot of these different kind of rumors about where XRP is going, the relationships it has with different central banks, with different major banks, and different credit card and payment processing companies. And I have a similar fear to you, where if that is the answer, and they'll say hypothetically XRP is going to be it,
Yeah,
that
hypothetically.
sounds like a horrifying future in
Right.
my mind. If nothing changed from it being Ripple Labs, that's just going to continue to be a company. That to me is, that's trading one poison for another one in the long term. And so I do have,
So
a big
trading,
question
what you
mark
mean is
there.
trading like the Fed, who
Yeah.
runs, the US dollar, which is a private organization,
Yep.
clearly is a private organization running, the US, capability of moving funds
Mhm.
versus another system of like Ripple going
Yeah,
on.
and so say, yeah, it really would be. We traded one corporate overlord for another corporate overlord, and so I know that there are other theories, though, that the United States government would just purchase all of the XRP, and that would be this massive buyback, and that everybody would make a ton of money because the U.S. government would have to pay us whatever was required to make us be willing to sell.
Yeah,
And
but
now
here's where I struggle with that one. Let's just say,
yep.
yeah, and by the way, we're just kind of vibing off each other here with that too.
Mhm.
But let's just say Zester owns, make up a number, 1,000 shares of XRP, and I own 1,500 shares. So I have a little bit more power in that particular, in
Mhm.
that particular arena. And Zester goes, "Oh God, Scott, you got to do this, right? I mean, they're going to pay you, a huge amount of money, and you're going to be like a millionaire tomorrow." Like,
Mhm.
and I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to. I mean, now what happens if Scott still owns it, but Zester doesn't?
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, do we force it out of his hand, and we start turning into 1933, where they stole everyone's gold, and you
Mhm.
had no choice in that matter? I mean, that's where I kind of go, hey, hold on, guys, this is getting really weird.
Yeah, and in the same, and I know this is another one that, me being in the industry and being someone that has, I can make a smart contract. I can release a cryptocurrency. Um, if there were ever a need and we just needed XRP's technology, we would just fork XRP's technology, create a brand new XRP 2.0, and the government wouldn't pay you a dime. Because why would
Yeah,
they need to?
yeah,
Why would they need to?
how
Problem
is that
solved.
good?
Problem solved. Well, if you just sat there and said, all right, no, I won't sell it to you, and many people would, and many people lost theirs.
Right.
It's on a wallet that they don't have access to. What are we going to do with that XRP? It's just there. It can
Yeah,
never
I
be
mean, how about
recovered.
someone who I mean, I mean, I'm going to be weird, but let's say someone who was huge into this, had a stroke. He's the only one that remembers his password capability. No one has access to it. What the heck you do with that? I mean,
Yeah,
it's gone. I mean, it's
yeah.
sitting in Ethernet, the ethos in essence. And that
Mhm.
actually happens with assets in states. I mean, they'll have like lists of people of, Joey and Jim have like, a plot of land over here, or a bit of gold, or a bank account, and no one knows who they are anymore.
Yeah, yeah. And so I do see something there, though, in the whole idea of a buyback, and I do. I'm, nothing I say, and I guess I should
It's okay.
include that, should ever be viewed as financial or legal advice, education and entertainment purposes alone. But I hold XRP. I believe that my XRP will be worth more in the future than it is today by a substantial amount. I believe that not near some of the numbers I've seen out there.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I don't buy those numbers. They have to make sense, but I do believe it'll be a lot more than it currently is. And so I believe that's going to be achieved not by XRP being the currency that we seem to have, that it seems to have been built up to on the internet, but that the XRP ledger would be the blockchain of tokenized real world assets, the blockchain
Right.
of tokenized gold, of tokenized silver, of tokenized everything, car titles and house deeds and All of those things are possible. And XRP says they plan on tokenizing gold and silver, and they plan on tokenizing other physical currencies or physical commodities.
Now, in that world, okay, so what you're talking about is basically helping the systems set values and abilities to move that money. That doesn't make XRP a currency anymore. It loses its currency phase in essence. But what it does is it becomes a vehicle of transfer between, Zester and Scott in essence, right? So, like when I send Zester a document, right, by email, I'm moving a piece of data from me to him, right? So as long as if I'm utilizing, for instance, a Word document, as long as he can get in and access through that Word document, let's say, yes, we both have, Office 365, right? Well, as long as we both have it, that's our access point, Office 365. The data was transmitted directly by email. In essence, that is some of the base level of XRP or Ethereum or anything else, is that kind of circumstance. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
No, it does. It's transacting of other goods. It's a facilitator. It is. It's a vehicle, and that is where you start to talk about a world where we would have people trying to buy our XRP. The reason we would have companies and governments trying to buy our XRP, because in order for them to go through and tokenize gold, tokenize silver, to transact in all these other real world assets that are just in a digital form, they would need to spend XRP to do it. In the same way that right now, when I send a transaction with XRP, I have to pay a fee in XRP. Same thing on Ethereum. If I want to send Ethereum, I have to pay a fee in Ethereum. Right. When I have RLUSD is Ripple Labs stable coin set to launch by the end of 2024. Actually, they've been testing it, and there's some really interesting myths going around to talk about on that one with them testing the RLUSD. But I would need XRP in order to send my RLUSD. I would need it. And so that means everybody else is going to need it. And that means they're going to have to buy it from those of us that hold it. And so in that way, I see what we're buy occurring.
Well, so in essence, there's two possibilities here. I mean, there might be something else we haven't thought of. I mean, we're going, oh, okay, I didn't know that, but that's okay. That's okay. And again, we're having to pontificate, with this thing too. I mean, I personally see it as a banking transfer system that the banks would utilize to move the money around, just like MasterCard or Visa is a transfer system between two banks in essence. That's how I see it, which therefore everyone who has XRP is going to make a bundle of money with that too, because they become the replacement of the SWIFT. Cool. Constitutional 100%, right?
Yeah.
Zester
and decentralized ownership in a large way.
Right. And by the way, if on this level, if XRP starts, screwing up and they start, not handling their transfers because they've got an old system or they're ridiculous, well, guess what? Some competitor can come in and go, you know what? We'll do a better job than they will, and we'll do it at a better price, for the banks. You go, fine, we'll use that, which is open competition in essence with that too. And there's nothing wrong with that. The second possibility he's talking about, which I find just as fascinating, is that the systems will be looking at it as this is how we quantify what things are valued at from a digital standpoint to an analog standpoint, right? Like, how much for that iPhone, and how do we look at that? Well, we could have a tokenized system that would quantify the QFS and that, to how much this little sucker is, right? And so that's a possibility. And the governments go, hey, we need that, so we could buy it. And I'm cool with that too, because again, it's not a currency. Does that make sense? Or is that okay?
No, that does, and it enters into a whole new realm, and that's where I think it gets confusing, because
It is, but it doesn't have to.
we're looking at something it's not just the same idea as, like, I have a US dollar, I have a US dollar in my wallet. That $1 it's a fungible dollar. It's worth the same as the $1 bill in your pocket, even if mine's torn up a bit or a little bit dirty. It's worth the same. And with it, I can then should be able to transact in any store inside of the United States or anywhere else that accepts it. It is just a means of transferring money from me to you. You hold it, it's your money. I hold it, it's my money. And it's done in a physical way. When you start to talk about things like XRP or Bitcoin or Ethereum, it's actually a share, and it's an ownership over that blockchain. It's not the same as just my dollar. My dollar doesn't make me one part owner of the United States of America. I don't have more of a vote because I hold $1. Whereas when we start to think about this idea of shares of a corporation, now we start to see a world where my amount of XRP is actually more a matter of the amount of ownership over the company or over the system that I technically have. And so with Bitcoin, the amount of Bitcoin you have dictates your vote on the blockchain, on the Bitcoin blockchain. And so whenever there is an alteration or change to the code, it's proposed by Bitcoin miners or by anyone else inside of the facility, the idea of adding, say, another upgrade or something onto it. A vote is held, and that vote is held by the amount of Bitcoin you hold in your wallet. It's not just the same idea as being, $1. Yes, my one Bitcoin is worth the same as your one Bitcoin. They are fungible, and they can't be in any way different than each other. But it's far more than just that same fungibility that the petrodollar provides us with today. And it's going to mean a lot more than just the financial system. And that's where I think QFS throws me off the most. Quantum financial system. I'm not excited in the same way about having a quantum financial system that I am about having blockchain voting. I am far more excited about the idea of fair, free, fraud-free elections. I am excited also about fraud-free money and a financial system that is resilient. I absolutely am excited about it. But I feel like if you were just to say that this is just going to be a financial revolution, then
it's not.
We're missing a lot. We're missing a lot of the answers we need for that financial revolution to stick. Because ultimately, if we all suddenly become the elites, then we're going to do the same exact thing that the elites of today have done to us. It will happen. Money corrupts. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
And that quote has never been wrong.
That's the point that, the QFS is only a vehicle of a monetary situation. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's really the quantum proposal that came up in 2019-ish. I'm going to get that wrong. There was an executive order that talked about this, but the quantum proposal is a very deep set of a whole different sets of processes. But what we're talking about on the QFS specifically is one of the things I'm kind of excited about, and that I've never really kind of voiced out there, is that as a business owner, when someone walks in and they swipe a credit card, they pull out their credit card. If I can't physically swipe it in or actually, pop it into the card reader part because it won't work, right? I instantly get charged a higher rate if they have to key it in. And then if that card tends to be a rewards card, I get charged a higher rate even still. And then, so there's these varying rates that frankly, I can never tell you what that number is. I've never been able to identify it, and they won't tell it to you, right? So they make a god-awful amount of money off of every single transaction. And God forbid someone walks in and my staff hears me, they walk in with an American Express, I get really pissy because there's incredible charge in American Expresses, right? And so, it's a frustration that happens, and we actually have it coded as bank card fees. And so the banking fees cost me a lot of money on an overall basis, right? So, I mean, obviously it saves me money if they write a check or they give, cash toward that, but you have to actually accept that because it's just part of that transaction. Well, guess what happens if we utilize something like XRP, and that becomes the transaction mechanism for pennies, in essence. I mean, a tiny pittance of amount, and it goes, it doesn't matter if you're transmitting $5,000 or $10, it's basically the same kind of fee.
Yes.
And to me, that is a bunch of freedom that will actually drive down prices in its own particular way.
Yeah. I think that it absolutely will. I mean, and it's also going to just entirely shift the way the economy is structured when we start to think about the different professions that are out there. I mean, we don't need the amount of banks that we have. We don't need entire bureaucracies inside of federal governments. I mean, we don't need the entire group. That, or maybe we need 1 out of 100 just to keep the lights on and make certain that the toilet's still flush. We don't need so many different roles of today. A notary. Why would we ever need a notary again when we have smart contracts that can verify absolutely in a decentralized way? Why there's countless. Why the credit card companies are all out. The financial industry on the whole is essentially.
I'm going to tell you this because you're saying it fascinatingly. But my father-in-law, when he passed away, we have his old iWatch. I can't get into the iWatch because I don't know what his password is, right? So we're just trying to give the dumb thing away. Because he set it to an AOL account, you have to reset the password. I can't get into the AOL account. And you know what the idiots are telling us at AOL is that we have to have a digital statement, an actual contract that said that he allows you not just a power of attorney or any of those other vehicles that we've already set up, but we have to have a digital type of system that says you are allowed to get the digital data. I'm like, he's dead. And it's the same kind of stupid that people get locked into with this because we have to have notaries and we have to have lawyers and we have to have all these other little things, and then people get screwed out of things, and that's a tiny thing compared to other things. But this is the stupid of the system.
Well, it's without something else, and in the current system, the way everything works, we need third parties. Ultimately, we need a third party for just about everything. I need a third party to buy a car. I need some guy to walk around and fill out the paperwork for me. And to give me a different price than he gave the last person.
Right.
I need a teller to go in when I have a check that for some reason I can't just put into the ATM because for some reason they decided. I need to go in and have a teller say, okay, sure, we'll cash your check. And this is just a small microcosm of the amount of different things in our world where we have got to always have some person, some entity say yes. And if they say no, well, then we're going to have to go hire lawyers. We're going to have to go through all of this stuff. We're going to have to prove so much. And in the long run, that authenticator, that third party is going to come out on top. Because they're going to win or they're going to waste a whole bunch of my money and a whole bunch of my time. And there's just no way of getting around that with what we currently have. When we look towards a new system, a new financial system, regardless of what it is ever called, we will no longer have to have that. And so for me, and I suppose that's one thing, it's we do not know. No one knows. Anyone that tells you they know exactly how this thing is going to work,
lie.
Sure.
Lie.
Sure. Yeah, sure, buddy. Whatever you say, there are a lot of people running around, with the end is nigh on the side of the road. And he's pretty certain too that he's right. And one day he will be right.
He's going to be biblically right. Correct.
Yeah, one day He's going to be right. You know, if you say that the markets are going to crash every day, you will be right eventually.
Right.
And so it's something that I think we can hypothesize and we can look at it logically, but ultimately we're going to find out about this as it begins to happen. And unfortunately, you and I, Dr. Scott, I don't think we have the credentials to be the first people that are informed about it. We may be the ones that are paying attention when we start to get that information, and in that way, we may be on the early end of learning. But ultimately, the way this ends up happening, I think, is not only going to be something we cannot predict, but it is something that is going to be influenced by the events that occur in the coming years. I believe that by 2030, we will have either achieved that world that we are imagining, or the World Economic Forum will have achieved the world that they are imagining.
Yeah.
And that we do not have, because this is something that I know, and people don't love it. I do not believe that we have won yet in that way. And I know many people like to take that, and in my mind, that's a beautiful world to live in. But ultimately, I've never found a world where other people won my fights for me, and I doubt they're going to suddenly do it this time out of nowhere. You know, this is something where we, the American people, we, the people of the world, are going to be the determining factor between whether this goes towards that CBDC world, that the World Economic Forum, and that they get together at Davos every year and talk about how awesome it's going to be. Or is it going to be the world where we live in decentralized finance, where the American people own their wealth and their future again, where the people of Brazil own the wealth and future of their country, and the people of Europe own the wealth and future of their country? Is it going to be that world? Or is it going to be a world that makes 1984 look like a Sunday stroll? That is something we can't know. And we also don't know if it's going to be an amalgamation of the two. We could have countries that are operating on central bank digital currencies, and then we could have countries that are operating on decentralized finance. And we could see the second Cold War occur over that ideological strain. Under nothing more than that, we could see the second Cold War occur as we begin to split apart. Look at China right now. China is not only testing and rolling out, they are currently using certain cities for their CBDC to see how it functions. Same thing, Russia is considered to be more in the pilot program type phase, whereas China is pretty confident that they have theirs hammered out. Ripple Labs offers a central bank digital currency book. I mean, literally, you can just go to Ripple Labs and you can say, hey, I would like to control all of my people and civilians' wealth. Got anything to help me out on that? And Ripple Labs has created that. And so there's
because they don't know. I mean, and the reality is, and what we're saying here, and as we wrap up here, is that we don't know every little thing here. But I will say this from a high level kind of standpoint: the world's pushing back at the idiots right now. The world's pushing back, and frankly, the statistics are, if 5% of your population rises up, you're done. The reality is, it's way more than 5%. It's in the realms now that are, pretty strongly awakened. You'd be surprised, but I'm seeing around 35 to 55% are pretty strongly awakened. You can disagree with me on that number, or it doesn't really matter. But the point is it's far above the 5% that can topple a government. And I think that we're seeing that level of that, saying, it's happening in Britain right now. And, this kind of rise up of saying, what you're doing is not okay with me. And I think the thing that the companies like the Ripples, or pick any other company that is looking at this, they're going to have to be responsive to the people. And if they decide, well, we want to do something that's not responsive, well, guess what's happening in Venezuela? They're rising up and they're about ready to kick him out of there. Maduro, he's almost gone. So I think that should be a calming kind of realm, that people should go, hey, don't get too upset about this. But you also need to go, you have a role in this, because you need to start studying about this thing. You can't just let everyone else do it for you, because that's where we got. I mean, that's where we're coming from with that too. So, do you have anything else you want to share, or any other idea out there?
The one thing that I would say, because I've been getting blown up with this one, and it's about XRP and the RLUSD testing that's been going on.
Okay.
And so it's a couple of weeks ago now at this point, they ran through the first test and they minted 10 quadrillion RLUSD tokens, and they started moving 10 quadrillion tokens around. And now for many people that, you know, were speculating and such, they said, well, look, this is an indication that we're talking in quadrillions now. You know, we're not talking in trillions or billions. We're talking in quadrillions. This is an indication that the XRP ledger is being prepared and being planned towards being able to facilitate transactions like that. And so, and this is an important thing, I guess, in one way for people to realize with blockchains. It doesn't matter if I send a transaction of 1, like you said earlier, or I send a transaction of 1,000. I pay the same amount in gas to do it. And that's because from the blockchain's perspective, it doesn't care how many units are inside of that transaction. And so whether that's any crypto, whether it's XRP or Ethereum or Bitcoin or any one of them, and we just call that a unit. And so it doesn't matter how many units are inside of a particular transaction. It matters how many transactions are occurring per second. And that's an important distinction of testing. And so they minted 10 quadrillion because it's a heck of a lot more fun to move 10 quadrillion around than it is to move 1 around. That's the logic, guys. That's the logic. I know that it's a fun number, and it makes you want to think that the price of XRP is going to be a market cap of $10 quadrillion, and that's the reason they did it. It makes it. I'd love it. I'd love it, guys. But that's not how the technology works. You know, I've minted and played with cryptocurrencies. I can mint a cryptocurrency that has 1 Google of total supply, and I can give myself the entire thing, and I can do whatever I want with it, and it's no problem at all. And it's a lot more fun than minting one that only has 100 in it. And that it doesn't make a difference. And so when you see a lot of those rumors out there, and a lot of times when you see things in regards to QFS or anything else, I highly recommend taking a step back, looking at it, and maybe going through a little bit of that research and understanding if what they're saying makes sense or not. We all have to live in a world of self-custody going into the future of our finances. And what self-custody comes with is responsibility that we don't want in the modern world. But we have got to take that responsibility on. And that means not only becoming financially literate, but also to a degree becoming technologically literate in terms of how these things exist. Otherwise, we are going to end up in the same position we are today eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. So, guys, that gives you an idea. So again, you can go and see him at YouTube at Crazy Cryptonaut. You can be able to kind of communicate with him on that way. But I definitely would love you to kind of go over there, go subscribe as well. And so if you have comments or questions, you can leave them down below. But I promise you, I'm sure some of you are rising up with your fear and anxiety, but you know, I'll just say it this way: do not be anxious for anything, but with prayer and supplication, present your request to Christ. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you, guys.